This is an audio version of the article, Is Ethics a Memetic Trap? Links to the original article will be found below. I've read up, though possibly superficially, on many ethical systems, or at least viewpoints on ethics. But it seems that once you reach the sphere of actions I can actually undertake in my daily life, almost none of the prescriptive claims given or derived from these systems actually differ. For the sake of argument, let's take a system like the existentialist ethics prescribed by de Beauvoir, an up-to-date version of Aristotelian teleology. Let's take Kant's deontology, Singer's branch of value of life consequentialism, and some New England-style Christian ethics. If you take an extreme thought experiment, the kind where you ask something like, what if a monarch with absolute power over the world could do X? Or what if I had a godlike action potential over life and death and the choice between granting one or the other to two groups of agents? Then you can argue ad infinitum as to how the actions prescribed by the systems of ethics differ, and I do believe that they might differ significantly, but we don't actually live in thought experiments. Applying the systems to the kind of choices that I make in everyday life, I can see all of them basically saying something like, I should take better care of my body, so I should exercise more, I shouldn't drink coffee late at night, I shouldn't vape or smoke, I should eat healthy and in moderation, I shouldn't be awake at 4 a.m. browsing Reddit, etc. They might say that I should be kinder to my friends and family, spare more time thinking about who might be alone during this time, maybe give them a call or visit them, etc. That I should donate more money to projects and organizations that I think help the world, for example, Wikipedia, and that I should volunteer more of my time to those entities. I should try to be better at my work, I should research more, I shouldn't give up on problems so soon, I should be nicer to the people I work with, I should spend less time signaling about the kind of work that I do and more time actually doing it. I should seek the kind of work that inspires me and that has a high potential for bringing new discoveries in fields that I care about. I should avoid spurious hookups, I should seek genuine and authentic connections with humans, I should be less afraid of expressing deep interests and desires to other people, etc. I hope you get the point. To some extent, if you boil down ethical systems to day-to-day actions, you get the kind of boring platitudes that one will see on motivational posters. It seems that most of the choices I have that might lead me to immoral actions are choices where I am fighting laziness or desire for things that I know to be insubstantial and ultimately vain and useless. Part 1. How to turn Hitler ethical. There's probably not a single mech job working, weed smoking couch potato that thinks, oh man, this is the life. God help those poor doctors helping people fend off the spread of tropical parasites in Rwanda. Most people that are in some way acting less ethically than they could seem to be doing so due to the inner workings of their mind and their present circumstances not giving them the power to do otherwise. Not due to lacking some sort of philosophical grounding by which they can determine ethical value. Even people who we would consider to be inherently evil would probably act very differently with just some minor tweaks to their lifestyles and circumstances. Let's say you have just 5 minutes to chat up young Hitler and turn him into an ethical man. Not anything saintly, just turn him from genocidal madman National Socialist leader to a mediocre painter that sometimes makes anti-Semitic jokes and complains about lack of discipline in society when he gets too drunk. Well, even assuming that we could get across the categorical imperative or the idea of forms having inherent purpose to Hitler in 5 minutes, this wouldn't necessarily convince him to abandon his way, right? So utilitarian Hitler and Christian Hitler will commit genocide just the same. Christian Hitler might use some excuse motivated by religious symbolism and purity. Utilitarian Hitler will use some excuse about the greater good. Existentialist Hitler will use some lines in Nietzsche about the Übermensch. But they will all be excuses just the same. They will be a facade over the real problem, which is this deep-seated anti-Semitism that's born out of years of repressed resentment that needs a scapegoat and a social environment that encourages and feeds those emotions. So, how do you actually stop that from happening? Well, I think that a good bet might be, instead of teaching Hitler ethics, telling him something like, hey man, I saw one of your paintings and it's quite nice. But you need to get a bit more creative, start putting some more style into it, express yourself more. Even if it feels like cliche or fake to begin with, you'll get there. And also don't care too much about what those university professors say. They don't know how to tell good art from bad art any more than any other people. So keep at it. Even if the university rejects you, apply to like 10 more. If all 10 reject you, go showcase your crafts in the streets of Vienna. Or, something like that. The point here is that the problem with most horrible people doesn't stem from their ethics. Barring people like Temujin, I would argue that most genocidal monsters had a pretty well-developed system of ethics. The popes could write a book about why the Crusades were right and moral. The 9/11 terrorists could probably write a book about why their actions were ethical and served the greater good. Most of the Nazi leaders or most of the ministers of the CPP could, and some of them actually did, write whole books from diverse angles and from diverse systems of morals about why murdering dozens of millions of people, sometimes in horrible and sadistic ways, was the most ethical thing to do. So, whilst it might be that all of these people didn't have the best version possible of whatever systems of ethics they adopted, it's not like they spent zero time thinking about it. Arguably, the problem stems from factors that built up anger, resentment, misinformation, and lack of alternatives that led them to take the unethical actions to begin with. Part 2. Willpower. Going even further, one could argue that there's not enough willpower to do all the things which would lead to a more ethical life. But in that case, I fail to see any way of ranking these things so that I could focus on one of them more than the other based on the values of a given system of ethics. Let's say I wanted to rank between day-to-day actions that will help me become a better moral agent. So say I'm choosing between exercising, doing research in a field I like, volunteering at a homeless shelter, or writing code for an open source project that I think is useful. So I go to Simone de Beauvoir and I ask the question like, which of these actions is the most ethical based on your system? And I get something like, well, we are all free to pursue our authentic selves, so considering all those actions seem like good things to do, choose whichever you feel like you would really want to. Try to look past social prescriptions and think what 20 years older you would think about it. If I go to Aristotle, I get something very similar, but it's something like, well, all those actions seem like good undertakings, but at the end of the day, every man's purpose in the world is different. Do whatever action suits you best based on the kind of man that you want to be. Whatever you know deep inside that suits your telos. Let's say I go to Bentham, and again I ask the same question, and I get, well, all of those actions could lead to some utility for you and for other people. I guess the choice is up to you to do the calculus and figure out which will work best in the long run, because there's no clear winner. All of those could bring some amount of utility. And if you can't do that calculus, well, just do whatever makes you happiest right now, because after all, maximizing utility includes yourself in this very moment, includes maximizing your own enjoyment of what you are doing. Let's say I go even further and I go to Jesus with that same question. And he will tell me something like, well, I guess the Bible says love thy neighbor, but really it was written 2,000 years ago, and back then the scientific method and computers weren't a thing. So in a way, those contributions are also indirect ways of helping your fellow humans. So, do whatever. All of those seem to be fine, as long as your top priority is still praying to God. All those 4 actions could be good. Or I go to someone like Kant and I ask him the same question, and I get, well, no matter what choice you make, you have to think about it from the perspective of the categorical imperative. So if all men were to make that choice, would the world be a better or a worse place? Now, looking at those choices that you've just listed, I see none of them violate the categorical imperative. So I guess do whatever you like best. After all, based on the categorical imperative, if all people were to select and pursue virtuous things which they enjoy, that would lead to a better world than one where they pursue virtuous things which they don't enjoy. So yeah, I assume that's something along the lines of what Kant would say. Maybe I am slightly misinterpreting some of those positions, and I am definitely simplifying them, but hopefully you can get my point here. There's countless actions that we do every moment which would be considered ethical, since they put us closer to a position from which we can better pursue and act rightfully in those few instances that are actually important, where our choice has a large ethical value depending on what we choose to do. But as far as the countless everyday actions which end up deciding our overall behavior, the problem really boils down to willpower and our choice in distributing said willpower. Even if we had infinite willpower, the problem would boil down to something like energy and time. But most people don't really have infinite willpower. You are bound to spend some time procrastinating or just doing things which you wouldn't agree with in hindsight. It seems that maybe the one thing that a system of ethics could do is tell you how to best spend your limited willpower. But even there, it seems that most systems of ethics would come up short, since they, to some extent, rely on knowing the consequences of an action. Even in the case of something like a normative system, since the kind of everyday actions that we usually take lack normative value unless you aggregate them over a long period of time, at which point you are essentially, again, looking at consequences. So from that perspective, wouldn't the study of ethics boil down to something that's in itself ethically neutral or even unethical? It would only lead to more rationalizing of our natural drives to take the easy route and procrastinate as indecision paralysis or pondering between choices, when in 99.9% of cases, we know what the correct action actually is. We don't need an ethical system to guide us, we just lack the willpower to make the correct action consistently. In conclusion, most actions lack direct ethical value, but taking them does amount to something of ethical value. However, this might not be immediately obvious. Even when it is obvious, taking the action that leads to good outcomes is usually inherently difficult. Ethical systems hold no obvious solution for figuring out how actions add up over time, or for overcoming mental barriers to provide us with more willpower. 2. The day-to-day actions that do have some ethical value associated with them don't differ in terms of direction between any given ethical system. No matter how you slice it, kicking a puppy is unethical. Helping an old lady cross the street is ethical. If they do differ in magnitude, for example, if it's quantifiably better to help an old lady cross the street rather than to help another old lady reach the top shelf in a supermarket, I fail to see a way of ranking actions being provided by most popular systems of ethics. 3. There are easy ways to be a better moral agent. But to do that, you should probably maximize the time that you spend taking care of yourself, taking care of others, volunteering, and working towards important issues, rather than, let's say, reading Kant. Thus, I've come to think of ethics as partially a sort of memetic trap. It intuitively seems that reading about ethics will help you act more ethically. But the more I read about ethics, the more I realize it's just a form of procrastination that, conveniently enough, can be rationalized as doing something morally good. When, in truth, reading about ethics is probably, as I said before, either ethically neutral or even unethical when compared to the other actions one could be undertaking during that period of time.